Hi, everyone. Welcome to Embracing Change. Today, our guest is David Mesas. He's Director of Sales for the Multicultural Vertical for NYIAX. Um, and David is going to tell us a little bit more about what NYIAX is and his role as Director of Sales. But the objective of this podcast is to talk about multicultural marketing, the growth, the opportunities, the challenges around it, and we have a great conversation coming. So, David, how are you?
I'm doing great, Gerardo. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for participating with us. Where are you connecting from?
Miami, Florida.
Okay, the capital of Latin America.
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much, right? That's what almost feels like. David, do you want to, for the benefit of our listeners, why don't you introduce yourself? I mean, I did a very short introduction now. Why don't you introduce yourself about your current role and also your experience previous to the conversation?
Absolutely. So I currently lead the multicultural division here, or vertical at NYIAX. NYIAX has partnered with NASDAQ, using NASDAQ technology and the financial rigor and transparency of the NASDAQ trading system to apply it to digital marketing, um, eh, buying and execution of digital marketing inventory as of right now. And it's going to expand into other areas like CTV, audio, TV, and other channels. We're essentially optimizing the workflows in the digital transaction process, from the
Mm,
RFP phase to the contract management and ultimately to the compliance and reconciliation and billing. So sort of soup to nuts, but really optimizing and saving agencies and publishers time in the process.
excellent.
Now, now, I mean, you asked me about my history. I mean, I came from I started at a company called Geoscape, and I worked there for a number of years, about 15 years, and ultimately went over to Claritas. And Geoscape was really known for multicultural marketing intelligence,
Hmm.
known as the industry leaders there from data analytics, consulting, and we were brought into the fold of Claritas to be their multicultural division. And up until recently was brought over to NYIAX.
Excellent, excellent. So when it comes to the multicultural vertical, how exactly does NIAX, if I understand, is almost media operations
Hmm.
services line up with by vertical? How does that work?
Yeah. So the multicultural division here is really responsible for identifying multicultural publishers, minority owned and diverse owned publishers,
Hmm.
Black owned, Hispanic owned, LGBTQ plus, women owned, veteran owned media, as well as media that's targeting or connecting with these individuals. So one thing is media that's owned by these groups, and others is those reaching, and the combination of those. So we're bringing those publishers to the exchange, as well as the holding companies, the agencies, as well as the multicultural independent agencies to
Hmm.
come together to really access that inventory.
Okay, okay, that's really interesting.
Now,
Go ahead.
one thing I want to add is that not just are we bringing those together, because I think anyone can do that nowadays, but it's also ensuring that the investments that are allocated and the budget requirements that are set by the brands to reach diverse or multicultural consumers is actually being done that way, and is actually being allocated and monitored from a compliance standpoint, that those budgets are reaching those individuals. So
Of
we add
course.
that extra layer of monitoring and compliance to the mix.
Of course, of course. Now, for the benefit of our listeners, I love to talk a little bit about why we chose to speak to you about the multicultural marketing, right? And I have
Yeah.
a few things to say about it, but I love to get your color into this, right? So we know that when marketing teams are thinking about marketing, they're thinking, there's two ways of thinking. There's general market, and then there's a multicultural market, right? And general market is basically the whole of the campaigns in the US. And then
Mhm.
if they have time and budget and they know how to do it, then they're going to start thinking about multicultural as a second step from that, right? Now,
Correct.
why multicultural matters? I think there's a study that shows that by 2044, the three multicultural groups in the US, Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians, are going to become the new majority, right? In
Mm-hmm.
the in
Mm-hmm.
the in the US. And the what it's interesting, I mean, I have some data here. What is interesting is that 92% of total growth in the US population within the last 15 years came from multicultural groups.
Mm-hmm.
15% of all US marriages are mixed or interracial. 42% of millennials are multicultural, and more than 80% use digital means, smartphones,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they influence more than a trillion in consumer purchasing power, right? However, even though 60% of chief marketing officers understand that there's a need for multicultural marketing, they still opt for a one size fit all, right? They still opt for doing a general marketing campaign. So I find that very interesting, and I
Yeah.
find that a huge opportunity for marketers in the US. What is your take on that? Why is it that, on top of all of this data, in your point of view, why does multicultural marketing matters and should matter to CMOs?
I mean, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I think the first census that really woke everyone up was the 2000 census. Really showed everyone that multicultural consumers were becoming a growth group: Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians. 2010 census validated that. I believe
Mm-hmm.
over 80% of the growth at the time, or 90% of the growth, was from these three groups. This most recent census confirmed that 100% of the growth came from these groups.
Mm-hmm.
100% of the growth, not 90. It's 100% of it. So the data has been, the data's been there, and now it's overwhelming. I think there's also now social factors that are pushing this. There's also business factors, and and you just can't ignore where the growth is going. You mentioned a lot of things. They tend to skew younger. They tend to be more digital driven. They tend to be the future labor force as well, and also prime age groups for a lot of consumer products that are spent. They're in that age group where they're having babies, buying houses, buying beds. All these things, all these different industries that they impact. Yet there's still CMOs that are thinking short-sighted, or not, don't really believe in it, or don't,
Mm-hmm.
or get caught up. I think they get caught up a lot, and this happens in several industries, specifically or especially in like CPG, where they get caught up with the attribution. Like if they can't measure that exact dollar came from a Hispanic or Black or Asian consumer or whatever group, they don't invest in it. And
Mm-hmm.
they hesitate. They need to see it before they believe it. In many cases, instead of believing it before they see it in the actual transactions. And I think a lot of it comes to the attributions, but the data doesn't lie. And I think that we're going to see a lot of companies fall to the wayside if they don't invest now. They'll be far behind the curve. Considering a lot of other competitors are already taking, a lot of big companies, the Walmarts, the
The
McDonald's,
Nikes.
the Nikes, they're all
Mm-hmm.
way ahead of that, leaps and years.
Yeah, I mean, Nike had, with the Nike, with the Dream Crazy ad,
Yeah. Oh
with
yeah.
Colin Kaepernick. I mean, I think they
Beautiful ad.
it's a beautiful ad, but it's really addressing this new reality in the US, right?
Hmm.
And it made a huge impact. What is interesting for people that haven't seen that ad, what is very, very interesting is that when it was launched, it was heavily criticized. People thought that Nike was making a mistake,
Yeah.
and everybody criticized them in the media. And then what happened in social media? Do you want to talk a little bit about that, David? I mean, what happened in social media is that consumers totally embraced it, right?
Hmm.
Embraced the
Hmm.
multicultural element. And here, when we're talking multicultural, we're talking about across. I mean, I know you and I were Hispanics, right? People can guess that from our names, but here we're talking multicultural all way. African Americans, Asians,
Hmm.
Hispanics, they just embrace the whole new reality, brown reality of the US, right?
Hmm. Consumers are way ahead of brands in terms of where the future is, and the future is now. And it's been happening since, I told you, 2000, 2010. That movement has been happening. We've been seeing a lot of companies invest. We sort of expected that to happen, um, in the in the market, just based on all the all the growth in the market, all the consumers that are out there, all the digital influence that's out there, and the people that were making a lot of noise from a consumer standpoint were these younger consumers that have access to social media and different platforms to really make sure their voice is heard.
Of course, of course. Now, some of the arguments I've heard when I speak to CMOs is related to the fact that, okay, yes, there's a multicultural audience, but that multicultural audience, it's also um, it has assimilated in a way, right? It's general market as well. So specifically when we talk about Hispanics, let's just look at the Hispanic
Mm-hmm.
cohort, right?
Okay.
You have first generation, which is the people that come here as immigrants and probably
Mm-hmm.
speak very little English, and they still have a lot of their um, cultural behaviors very much ingrained that they brought from their own regions. Then those people stay here in the United States, and they have children, and those children are second generation, right? And then you have the people that have been here for three generations. So you have the first, second, and third. You know this better than I do.
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm just describing it for our audience. And the argument that I've heard from CMOs is that those second generation, and in particular third generation, are bicultural, right? They still
Mm-hmm.
feel very much in touch with their culture and their values, but they have assimilated. They feel total bicultural. They might watch a football game with their friends on a Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
and then they might do a carne asada with their family on right. So they would
You're
do both.
describing me.
And yeah, and my children too, right? And so their argument is, we reach those people with the general market. Why do we need
Mm-hmm.
to do multicultural marketing? And I think there's something about emotional connection, and the answer is about emotional connection and being able to connect with those people in a way that is really relevant, that is going to convince them that you're the right brand from them, for them. But what do you say about that argument?
Yeah. So, a lot of people get caught up with um, are they in language? Should we be talking to these people in Spanish? Hey, they're speaking English now. They're far removed from the culture. Um, but the fact is that if we're just talking about Hispanics right now, Hispanics compared to other immigrant groups in the history of the U.S. have tended to become, instead of assimilating fully to one culture, to the American culture, the Hispanic culture finds beauty in being bicultural, 100%
Mhm.
Hispanic, 100% Latino, and 100% American. They don't feel like they have to choose one or the other. So when you're a brand and you're thinking just language, hey, these guys, we're going to reach them on ABC or ESPN or whatever it is, and not thinking that it's not just about language. Yes, language is a tactic. Should we do English? Should we do Spanish? But I think what's more important, I think where you were alluding to, is being in culture,
Mhm.
looking at the research, looking at the insights. What does the data tell us? What insights can we extrapolate? I'm a second generation Argentinian. I was born here in Miami, English speaking, bilingual, fully bilingual. And I watch the American football on Sunday, and when there's soccer, I'm watching the football soccer in
Uh-huh.
Spanish.
Yeah.
So yes, you can catch me in either language, but it's not about the language. It's what are you putting in the creative to speak to me and my family, and the way that I operate, and the way that I shop, the way that grandmothers are like super involved in the Hispanic culture, and the grandparents, and that the whole family feel. Those little insights, even though you're doing it in English on a general market channel, you can still talk to me in a way that really connects emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
culturally,
Mm-hmm.
and which will move me to hopefully a call to action, a purchase or something. So I think that brands, the smart ones, understand that. They hire agencies that are specialists, that understand these insights, that understand the importance of being in culture, and then
Mm-hmm.
treating language as a tactic. And this goes the same for Asians and any other group. Obviously, with Asians and Hispanics, you have the language thing, but there's also certain cultural nuances with African Americans that you need to touch on, even if you're just reaching the total market, right? You do need to speak to those little insights that you extract from the research or from your interactions with your own customers.
Absolutely, because people will feel reflected in the advertising, right? And they need to
Yes.
feel reflected, that they need to be addressed by the message, right? And if you don't pay attention to those cultural nuances, then you're missing an opportunity. And as you rightly said, it's 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 not about being in language; it's about being in culture, and that in
Hmm.
culture means many things, right? Family dynamics, social dynamics, the choice of colors, the choice of the the setup for the
Hmm.
social interaction. There's so many different things. And also it means that if you're in culture, you really uh, it's very nuanced, right? An example I have, many years ago, many years ago, I'm saying 8 9 years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I have a lot of friends that work for Coca-Cola, right?
Hmm.
And one of my friends was, I think, marketing director for Hispanics, right?
Hmm.
And he was telling me that a lot of what they were doing was trying to be very careful with their messaging, in the sense of what they chose to really represent the culture, right? So, for
Hmm.
example, he was giving me the example of, if you show for Hispanics, right? If you show for Mexicans in particular, if you show a mariachi hat, that's cliche, right? That's how the general market thinks of Mexicans. In
Hmm.
culture, for Mexicans, it would be the luchador mask,
Yeah.
right? That was a thing at the time. You would see in the stadiums people with the luchador mask. It was a symbol of, among ourselves, we understand each other, that's kind of like a symbol of our culture. And I thought that was very interesting. It's not only to think about those symbols that represent that culture, but they cannot be cliche. They have to be felt appropriate by the culture that you're trying to address.
It's true. And yeah, I mean, I always laugh at brands that they just try to appropriate different things and use little things of the culture to represent the culture, when the culture itself sees it as, you're very basic. You're not really hitting home.
Hmm.
The mariachi is one of the things that they do for the Mexicans, and you can name it for any other group. And I think you really need to research. I came from a research background. I'm a huge believer in doing your research, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, really understanding your customers, right? And
Yeah.
and trying to, if you're trying to reach a wider message while still connecting with those different groups, there's certain insights that can talk to all of them. But at some point, you're going to have to make a decision. Yeah, I want to have a total market, but there's some markets like a Miami, an LA, where you do need to speak to Hispanics. You do need to. Your general market is your Hispanics, right?
Hmm.
The Hispanics
Hmm.
are the general market. So in certain markets, you need to be market specific. You can't have a general national campaign, but when you're in your markets, you need to be local. And I think multicultural is also local. It's
That
neighborhood to
that's a
neighborhood,
ver-
market to market.
that's a very good point. That is a very good point. And I don't know if that falls under multicultural layering that we wanted to talk about, but I'm just gonna drop it there, because it's true. I mean, just staying just a little bit more on the Hispanic example, but I
Hmm.
want this to talk, I want us to move out of Hispanic, right, in a
Hmm.
second. But just staying on the Hispanic example, Hispanic is just a general word, but there's so many nationalities
Hmm.
in within
Hmm.
Hispanic marketing, right? And those nationalities normally are located in different areas and regions of the United States, right? So if you're talking about Florida, probably you're talking more about Cubans and Venezuelans, right? If you're talking
Hmm.
about California, probably you're talking more about Mexicans, and if you're up in New York, might be more Dominicans, and all of these cultures. Yes, they share Hispanic as a Hispanic brand, or the Hispanic title, because they share a language, but really culturally, they're very different. they behave differently in many patterns in their social behaviors, their saving behaviors, their purchasing behaviors are totally different. So to your point, there's some layering that needs to be put on top of the title, right, of either Hispanic or Asian or African American. Can you
Hmm.
tell us a little bit more about how that looks for other is, minorities, or now almost majorities?
In terms of the different like countries of origin and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, what does it mean, for example, if marketeer is trying to reach out to Asian Americans, right? I
Hmm.
assume, I don't know much about Asian American marketing exactly, but I assume it would have a similar effect to what we just described about Hispanics, where
Hmm.
to target a Cuban is totally different than to target a Mexican.
Yeah. So, and I think that's what scares. I have to say that probably is one of the things that scares the marketers because um, it's when they see, oh my God, there's so many different groups. And I don't want to offend an Argentinian or a Mexican with a word that I say, or when you're talking about Asians, I think with Asians, it's even more important to be cognizant of the countries. With
Hmm.
Hispanics, I mean, we have a lot more similarities than we'd like to admit. I mean, we like to think that we're different from each country, and we do have our differences, but there's a lot of similarities. But when you talk to Asians, you have an Asian Indian, you have Asian Japanese, and they're completely different cultures. There's similarities in the sense of the Asian background and the way that we as marketers look at them. Um, but if you look at the data, again, the data, the research, you'll notice that even among Asians, there's certain groups that over-index for certain things, whether it's
Hmm.
electric vehicles or whatever the purchase may be, and it's certain countries that do better in those purchases. We'll lump it all as, oh wow, Asians do great with electric vehicles, but when we look deeper in the data, we'll notice that it's probably the Chinese or Japanese or whatever group it might be.
Hmm.
Don't quote me on that because I haven't looked
No,
at the
no, no,
data,
no.
but there's certain data as uh, over-indexing that happens within certain groups. Now it can get messy if you start talking about all the different languages and whatnot. But I think again, when you're talking about Asians, marketers are trying to find similarities within the group, just like with Hispanics. But
Hmm.
if they do identify a certain insight that says, hey, it's Asian Indians that are doing this over-indexing purchasing on this category, then we do consult them on being more specific and talking to that group specifically and really understanding the language implications if necessary and any other insights you need on that group. But yeah, that's where it can get, I wouldn't say messy, but a little bit more complicated. And that's why you bring specialists, a specialist agency, an Asian agency that knows what they're doing, really understands how you can talk to them as a group, but where they know where you can win by talking to them individually. And you need to have experts, just like you have experts for any other segmentation you do or any other marketing you do for the general market. Um, you need to be smart, and the data just shows it. At this point, you need to look at it. But as marketers, we need to make it easier for the CMOs and the brands to really um, test the waters, dip your toes in, and start talking to these groups, and then being more strategic, more niche, and speaking to each individual country of origin.
Okay. So I would love to, and I think that's really interesting. How does then artificial intelligence platforms and digital platforms like the one that you represent help CMOs test those waters and make those decisions?
Well, for the first, in the initial part, it's access to the inventory,
Mm-hmm.
making recommendations on not just the diverse owned inventory, but also the inventory that's reaching these groups.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that right now, it's really done manually.
Mm-hmm.
When we program the parameters of the campaign into a system like the NYIAX platform, the system will go in there and search for the inventory and do it all automatically over thousands of different publishers, and then
Mm-hmm.
return the right inventory that we recommend, curated for you. And that's something that could take a person a week or so, and it's being done in milliseconds.
Okay.
The other thing is you can put offers in there or requests for orders and say, hey, I looked in the system didn't find exactly what I needed. I'm looking for this specifically. Put out the orders, and all the publishers will get those orders and start to bid on that RFP for you. So the AI is enabling and automating a lot of that too. Another important part is monitoring that these impressions are being served to these groups, because
Mm-hmm.
you're investing all this money. and for whatever reason it's not being served, you need to be doing make goods. Um, that creates gaps in the performance of the campaign. And then at the end of the day, the CMO sees, hey, this didn't work. But when you look at the data, maybe there was inefficiencies in the performance of the campaign due to fraudulent viewability or whatever it might be, that our system using technology and AI can detect and notify the parties real time so that you
Mm-hmm.
can address it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that, I mean, it's really what I say is start small, start where you can win, lowest hanging fruit. Some people start with Hispanic, some folks start with other groups depending on their categories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, don't try to do them all at once. Some folks
Okay.
try one group and then they learn and apply those learnings. Believe it or not, there's learnings that you can apply to other groups.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, yeah, there certainly is. I mean, not necessarily the insights, but the how you're going to market, um, and just the flow of the creative and just the reception of the ad by the different groups. So there's a lot of insights you can extract and learn from, and then make better on the follow up. But we've seen that brands that try to do too much and try to reach all the groups at once and try to say, hey, it's the best thing to do, let's go do it. They bite off more than they can chew,
Mm-hmm.
and then end up shelving the project for another year or two, right? So that's what we
Mm-hmm.
want to avoid, and make the test nimble, easy to measure, and defining what success means up front. Is it to drive more sales? Is it drive more awareness, more clicks, and being very specific on what success means
Yeah, what the
up front.
KPI is. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
what the KPI is. And David, I'll be interested to know how much do you see the multicultural effort being driven by digital platforms that can actually reach out, can be easily segmented, that you can actually attribute to the right media, the right channel, the investment, versus above the line investments that normally it's hard for for advertisers to know where exactly the investment went, who
Mm-hmm.
who was reached by the message. So do you see, in your experience working with clients, do you see clients using um, digital platforms as the main means to drive multicultural, while above the line platforms or above the line investments to drive more of a general message? In your experience, what is it that you've seen? And maybe there's not an answer for this, but I just thought I
Yeah,
ask.
there's not a perfect answer, a beautiful answer. I mean, they're the TV, the audio. I think it's gonna be a radio. Direct mail. I think is also still important. All those channels. But you're seeing a strong shift to digital overall, and
Hmm.
advertising in general. But for multicultural, even faster shift because of the numbers that
Faster.
show the the increase. The high indexing for social, for digital, for tech usage, for phone, usage, so mobile,
Hmm.
and mobile is digital, right? So and streaming and whatnot. So you're seeing a lot more of that movement by these groups.
Hmm.
So the dollars are shifting, but I wouldn't stop investing in those other channels, those other the mass, the mass platforms, or even the local radio channels that reach these groups specifically, because you do need to take an omni-channel approach.
Hmm.
Um, TV wise, radio wise, digital wise, but also when you're talking about uh, in the digital ecosystem, also reaching them through digital, social, email, and trying to be like an omni-channel approach to really surround the customer, make them feel like you're everywhere. But the biggest thing is attribution. It's
Hmm.
whatever channels you're using. The more measurable it is, the more likely it is that the CMO and the CFO, who's driving a lot of those decisions, will say, okay, let's invest behind it. So
Okay.
digital, being by nature, is more measurable, and it's taking a lot of those dollars because of that.
Because of that. And when it comes to AI platforms like NYIAX, and you're talking about multicultural investment, are we talking about what type of inventory, what type of assets can you find in this type of platforms? Is it display networks? Is it pre-roll ads in video platforms? Is it keyword based
Yeah.
copy ads? Tell me a little bit more about what's available.
Is digital ads and video ads on the ad networks.
Hmm.
We're not doing social or search or
Okay.
any keywords, any of that yet. We are exploring CTV and audio as well, so that should be added soon. From a digital, it's just the video and display ads on the ad networks, and you can get an inventory from the Colossus of the world, the Colossus SSP that has diverse owned media and multicultural targeted media, to your Univisions, your H codes,
Exactly.
all the different players in the multicultural space, as well as new up and coming publishers that are joining the ranks to get their media out there. So we're doing a lot of work curating. We have a team that works on the publishers and a team
Hmm.
that works on the buyers, which is the agencies and the brands.
And that is all. When we talk about video ads, that's all through addressable TV platforms, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Um, so, for example, when it comes to, let's say, an advertiser that wants to build a media plan around uh, uh, a multicultural segment, is it a one-stop shop? Can they go with NYIAX or one of your competitors and do a one-stop shop, or do they still have to deal with different organizations to be able to place that effort?
Yeah, I mean, we work with the advertising agencies,
Uh-huh.
and we work directly with them and their brands and the campaigns that they're running. We do have some brands that have brought in their digital media buying in-house. You're seeing that happen more and more.
Mm-hmm.
So when it's a digital media buying company, we can work directly with them, but they're still going to need to work on their creative. They're still going to have to make, the activation of the campaign in their DSP
Okay.
or on their ad servers. So they still need to execute and activate the campaign outside of the platform. But we would be managing the sourcing of the inventory, the contract management, the monitoring of those campaigns using whatever billable source the client has, whatever verification partners they have for fraudulent viewability or for the impressions. And we monitor all that in one place, and then we help them with the final piece, which is the billing and the reconciliation of that. But the actual activation, after we found the inventory and created the deal IDs, we push those to their DSP or their ad servers, and then they can activate and run the campaign essentially outside. So whether it's direct with the brands or with their agencies, but they still need to have a creative team and
Of course,
and
of
someone
course,
kind of monitoring the whole thing.
of course. But they can manage their campaign through the platform, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, they can have one person in there looking at it. And sometimes not even be in there because it'll notify you if something strange is happening that you should check out, and it'll shoot
Mhm.
you an email and you can be notified immediately.
Excellent, excellent. David, I know we had a prep talk before this, and I recall us talking also about uh, adding into, I don't know if it could be called multicultural, but there's the segment, the LGBT segment,
Hmm.
uh, woman, all sorts of different segmentations that are still very relevant for brands in order to really connect with audiences.
Hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that layers on top of what we've been discussing?
Yeah. So the Association of National, the ANA, Association of National Advertisers, almost forgot their name there. They have a conference every year on multicultural and diversity and inclusion. And from the very beginning, a lot of folks looked at multicultural as just these multicultural groups like African Americans, Hispanics, Blacks, Asians, these different groups. But more and more, the ANA and other and companies like us have included more groups that are diverse. They may not be multicultural, but they belong part of that diverse and inclusiveness set,
Mm-hmm.
which LGBTQ plus, veterans, people with disabilities, even women. So there's certain groups that underrepresented, underserved, and we tend to look at all of them the same in the sense that we want them to be included in these campaigns and talked to specifically by these companies. And so we make inventory that reaches those groups and that are owned by those groups available
Mm-hmm.
on our platform. So we
Mm-hmm.
follow the same requirements or recommendations that the ANA puts out there, and we attend their conference every year, and it's the premier multicultural conference and diversity and inclusion conference in the U.S. and one that I recommend folks attend if they want to learn more about what's happening and what will continue happening in this industry.
So, can you repeat, for the benefit of our audience, the name of the conference and do you know when it happens?
So it's the Association of National Advertisers, the ANA, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the ANA Multicultural and Diversity Inclusion Conference. It happens one year. So this year was in San Diego in November, and now next year it's going to be in Hollywood, Florida. So it bounces from the East Coast to the West Coast, and the following
Okay,
year it'll be back in San Diego, but it'll be in Hollywood, Florida,
around
2022, I
November.
believe, in November. Yep.
Around November. Excellent,
Mhm.
excellent. So, I'd like to move to our next topic, which is scale versus niche, right? We talked about the importance of addressing multicultural and how brands need to balance general market versus multicultural efforts. Is do brands need to choose if they have to go for scale or they can go niche? Is this something that could actually be achieved? Both of them. Let's talk about that. What's your point of view on this?
Yeah. I mean, in a perfect world, we could have both, but we're actually getting closer to that perfect world where these groups are big enough, where the niche, if you want to call it, Spanish or multicultural, are big enough that they have the scale, right, nationally.
Hmm.
When you start looking at some markets, perhaps not, and I think that's where you get a little bit, gray area. But there is scale nationwide, and we're starting to see more scale in the digital ecosystem too. I think initially for the first few years, uh, there was difficulty. I think up until recently too, there was difficulty in reaching scale.
Hmm.
There's also difficulty in reaching scale on the social media platforms too, because they're being more restrictive on how you can target groups, right? Like the
Hmm.
Facebooks of the world and the Googles are being more restrictive on how you can isolate or connect with multicultural and diverse groups. Um, but we're seeing a lot more data players in the space, a lot more publishers that are coming together and creating these scale nationally. But again, I think the hesitation is when you start to hit specific markets, do you have enough scale to reach them? And that's something that it will vary by group, but that's been continuously and gradually improving as you have more data players creating data lakes, onboarding offline data online to allow you to target individuals. So it's creating that scale, but it's still not there yet in some markets. But nationally, for a brand to say they're not reaching scale is not a good excuse.
It's not a good excuse because now there's enough. These minority groups or multicultural groups are. I keep calling them minority, but it's not no longer a minority, right?
Yeah, no.
These multicultural groups are now they've reached a size
Hmm.
that their their scale uh, on themselves.
Yeah, they've reached significant scale. I mean, if you just talk about the Hispanic group, that's 62 million nationwide. I mean,
Yeah,
if you don't want 62, I mean, 62 million people, I mean, you're not going to get them all, but imagine just
yeah,
a percentage of that becoming your customers every year, right? And that's just one of the groups.
yeah,
When you add them all together, I think you're closer to, like 100 million or so or more. So
yeah.
it's you get the scale, and the fact that more and more of them are digital, more and more of them are mobile, more and more companies are investing to connect those dots. You're getting
Hmm.
the scale now. While we're on the point of scale, as you have companies like Google removing cookies and companies like Apple creating it harder for you to connect with folks digitally by removing those digital connectors. I think there you're going to have some issues with scale across a lot of different groups, not just multicultural.
Yeah.
But then you're going to be able to target based on lifestyles and other known factors that may still create that. So, but for now, I'll answer the question of how I answered it. But
Yeah.
not a good reason to not invest.
Yeah, and really the The issue with iOS changes and what some of the platforms are doing has less to do with brands being able to target those audiences. It has more to do with being able to attribute the conversion, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not getting the data point back or the traction back, but we're
Hmm.
still being able to address those audiences appropriately,
Yes.
right?
For now,
Um,
I mean, for
for
now.
now, for now, true, 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 for
Yeah.
sure, for sure, for sure. So, just citing some of the ANA numbers, right? That you talked about. There was in the 2018 trends analysis, right? That the ANA ran,
Hmm.
um, exposed that over between 50 and 60% of top US advertisers spend less than 1% of their ad budget targeting multicultural audiences, right? Although multicultural audiences represent way more of their spending power. Do you think that that is being rebalanced, or there's a chance for that to get rebalanced in the near future?
Mm, you know, based on my work that I did previously, I did a lot of database enrichment for a lot of the major, I'm not going to name names, a lot of the major brands in the US that have data, that have consumer data. And we would help them identify the ethnicity of their customers using an advanced algorithm based on immigration summary data, highly accurate, over
Mhm.
90% accurate, which would allow us to identify the percent of their customers that are Hispanic, Black, Asian. Um, and in many cases, the percentages were either the same as the US population or higher, which means that their customer base was in some cases almost 20% Hispanic, almost 30-40% multicultural. Um, and then their investments reflected, like you said, 1%, less than 5%, definitely less than 10%.
Mhm.
Which doesn't even start to talk to half of, just barely goes over the percent of Asian population in the US is
Mhm.
about 6 or 7%. So the percentage, if you look at it apples to apples, it's not close. Should it be the same? Yes, in a perfect world, us marketers would love for it to be 40% of the budgets go to multicultural. I don't think it'll be like that. But what should be is a more realistic percentage, right? Maybe 20% of it, right? That
Mhm.
really addresses the core and gives you enough resources to really talk to these folks nationally, like we talked about, but then having the resources to talk to them locally and really hit home where you have a right to win in markets
Mhm.
like Charlotte, Raleigh, North Carolina that are growing significantly that nobody was paying attention to
Mhm.
from a big market standpoint are now growing really fast, and they're growing because of multicultural consumers. Being smart on where you can add budget to really win. But if you just sprinkle 10, I mean 5, 10%, I wish not even
Yeah.
that high. If it was 5%, you're not going to have enough resources to do it right, and then you're going to say it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's probably why a lot of CMOs don't do it, because they've gone um, half, on what they should be doing,
Yeah.
and in reality, this requires an investment, just like the general market requires an investment, and it should be a true analysis. And we're now seeing, like you said, the research by the ANA. The ANA also created AIM. It's another acronym. Don't ask me to spell it out. AIMM. Um, and they're in charge of inclusiveness and multicultural marketing. They have members that have signed up to ensure that representation, that those budgets grow.
Mhm.
So now there's a lot more accountability by the industry leaders, by the industry organizations, by the CMOs like Procter and Gamble's Mark Pritchard, who
Mhm.
stands very proudly in front of that and encourages companies to invest. And he's doing that for P&G, which I tip my hat off to them.
Of course.
But that is really what it's going to take. It's increasing that investment, because if you don't invest fully and expect the same results as, you don't invest like the general market but expect the same returns and results as the general market, um, that's insanity, right?
Yeah.
And that's been going on for many years. But I will tell you, in the last 16 months, all the social changes that have happened in this country, all the the political and social and corporate changes have really changed the conversation. I think we're in a different time now. I'm not saying it's going to swing to 10%, 20% overnight, but you're seeing some significant changes, some significant commitments by big companies.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think one of the key takeaways of 2020, right, is that the culture is shifting, right? Culture is shifting. We have a young, more diverse
Hmm.
generations
Hmm.
that soon are going to be jumping into leadership positions, right? That they would have in a few years more power, more influence,
Hmm.
and those communities are going to be more diverse, more multicultural, open, more open also to social changes. We know that there's more women of color in jobs. We know that there are more African Americans and Hispanics finishing college and starting to increase the household incomes of the families. And that education is going to be a power tool as well, because they're going to be able not only to earn more but also influence more in society.
Hmm.
So to me, if I'm a CMO looking at my 10-year plan, and I don't know if anybody does a 10-year plans anymore, but if we're looking at the future
Hmm.
of the markets, um, not looking at multicultural as a as a real avenue for growth, it's almost insanity. It's almost insanity,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because you're basically not addressing a reality of a changing society in this country for the better. It's a changing society for the better. I mean, it's a more inclusive society. It's a society that recognizes our differences, right? So anyway, I know this is your interview, but I felt
No,
I
no,
had to
that
say that.
I'm you're preaching to the choir, but I'm with you 100%. I mean, that's the way it is. All the things you said is on point. About these generations that are getting, what we call the millennials are now the oldest millennials are 40 years old.
Exactly.
So they're not babies anymore,
Exactly.
and they were born with technology. They grew up, in the years where technology was created. That's the whole millennial thing. Let's not even talk about Gen Zs, but even Gen Zs are getting to an age where they're starting to influence. But once you get that millennial force, even the millennial generation, even more into the labor force, you're going to see significant changes for the better. I mean,
Hmm.
for the most
Hmm.
part, I would say, but in terms of inclusiveness and in terms of caring for the world and putting their money behind brands that actually stand behind what they say and care about the communities they serve. Though that's what this generation is all about.
It's all
And
about.
they also grew up, seeing the mistakes or opportunities or whatever you want to call it of the previous generations, just like any other previous generation
Hmm.
before them. And I think they're going to learn from that and apply it. But yeah, like you said, how many people actually have 10-year plans now? How many CMOs stick around after 2 4 years?
No. Yeah.
How many agencies have an account for more than 5 years? I don't know. Maybe there's probably a lot, but not that many.
Hmm.
Where they can see that far into the future and plan that way. But like I said, the future is not 5 years away. The future is now. It was yesterday. I've
Yeah.
been doing this for 20 years. And honestly, Gerardo, we've been having this conversation with people every day, of those years, with data, with charts, with maps, with their own customer data.
Uh-huh.
And they still refuse to put in the budgets that equate to the opportunity in front of them. Now, not all of them. You still have, the smart players, the Nestle's of the world, the PepsiCos of the world. You mentioned Coca-Cola, they as well. The General Mills, the P&Gs, a lot of these companies are doing it right. They
Hmm.
still have a lot to learn too, and they're humble about it. But they're proactive about their investments.
And do you think one of the probably reasons why they're not committing, some of the companies that are not committing, could it be because of representation, lack of representation?
I mean, it helps. I'm a big believer that it helps to have representation in the room with the people that are making the decision. You need to have
Mm-hmm.
folks that understand, that either have lived it or lived around it,
Mm-hmm.
but that can represent it. I'm not saying you have to be of the culture, because you could probably live around a certain culture and be immersed in it where you really understand it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you do need to have folks represented in the room, at whatever level, wherever the decisions are being made. You do need to have folks that can influence that. And if you don't have them in your company, you're not there yet. It's fine. You're going to get there. At least hire folks, consultants, agencies, people that have folks like that on their teams that can bring that wealth in house.
Exactly. Hire
You know,
hire that.
yeah.
Hire
Outsource it
out.
if you have to.
Yeah.
Outsource diversity if you have to. Can't believe I'm saying that, but that's the way some companies are treating it. If you have to, but I think at some point you're going to have to make sure your team is diverse and inclusive because you want to represent the communities you're serving.
Of course. Of course. So, David, in your point of view, from your perspective, what's next? What's next in multicultural marketing? What's
I
coming?
mean, now for me, I mean, the future is bright. I think there's a lot of opportunities, a lot more companies. You're going to see the tips scaled more, the scales tipped more towards multicultural when you see more and more companies standing behind it and showing the results of those investments.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I mentioned the ANA conference. We get to see a lot of the speeches of those CMOs at that conference, and they talk about the successes they've had.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more and more as more companies share around the campfire what's going on in the industry and what's working, and more thought leadership, you're going to see more investments, and that's going to accelerate dramatically the the multicultural, the diversity. I mean, the word of the year I just put it on my LinkedIn today. Is the word of 2020 for the ANA is diversity, and it won by a landslide. So if
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't tell you something, it's just the beginning of something big. I think also you're going to see more and more investments on what can be measured. That's going to be accelerated as well. What
Mm-hmm.
can be measured, what can be tied back to someone walking into a store. I know there's going to be more difficulty based on what we talked about with cookies and mobile device IDs and all that being restricted from the attribution. But I think we're going to see innovations in that space to be
Mm-hmm.
able to measure the success. And at the end of the day, because of companies like NYIAX and others, you're going to see more automation, more involvement of
Mm-hmm.
the blockchain, more transparency in the
Mm-hmm.
mix,
Mm-hmm.
to ensure that, hey, I put 10 million impressions. How many of those were actually seen by people? Did it show up? Where was it shown on the screen? Was it fraudulent? All these different metrics that will help keep the publishers accountable, the agencies, and then the brands accountable to themselves in terms of the investments they're making. So I think
Mm-hmm.
AI is going to play a greater role in automating a lot of parts of the process that for some time have been obviously manual, but also in some cases mismanaged. And brands are waking up to the how their budgets are being invested, where it's being invested, and what it's driving. But I'm excited about it because there's going to be more data, more tech, and with 5G and the Web 3.0 that's coming around the corner, it's just exciting times to be in marketing and advertising.
It's very, very exciting, and it's very exciting for us. I mean, we have a digital marketing agency,
Yeah.
digital marketing consulting, and we've grown this year with multicultural clients. That's one of the reasons we wanted to talk to an expert like yourself. Um, and as we discussed during the podcast, a lot of this growth is going to be channeled through digital platforms, right?
Hmm.
So we're really looking forward to all of this because obviously we want to be part of that as well. So it's all very interesting. Future, hopefully. Very good,
Yes.
David. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated this conversation. I enjoyed it a lot, and I don't know. I hope you did too.
And although I enjoyed it tremendously, it's fun to talk to you and just to get into the flow of speaking about multicultural and the industry. It's something I'm passionate about. I'm happy that you are too, and I'm excited to be on the podcast, and hopefully someday we can also work together and capitalize on
I
the
would
whole
love to.
digital wave that's coming our way.
I would love to. I would love to. And by the way, I'm gonna go to Florida in January for business, and I'll try to reach out to you and be
Yeah,
able to meet in person now that
yeah,
we're starting to get together again.
absolutely, Gerardo.
Thank you so
Dinner on me.
much. Thank you, David.
De nada, cuídate. Bye now.